I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
The decision arrived without ceremony, yet its impact struck the royal household like a thunderclap. Behind closed doors, the Privy Council activated the authority of the 1917 letters patent and issued a ruling that immediately changed Camilla's family's place near the crown. Their access, ceremonial recognition, and any expectation of future HRH status were formally extinguished, and the Queen was given no opportunity to stop it. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles sat alone at his private desk as the final ruling was placed before him. He read the first page twice, slower the second time. The Privy Council, the formal body of senior advisors supporting the sovereign on state matters, had enforced the 1917 letters patent, a royal document created to limit who could hold princely rank and use the style of his or her royal highness. This was not a warning. It was active. The order was specific. Camilla's children, grandchildren, and wider family could not receive, use, or inherit HRH status, royal titles, crown privileges, or any position inside the royal household. Privileged seating would disappear. Restricted palace access would end. Security consideration, ceremonial recognition, and entry into private royal gatherings would now depend on personal invitation. The ruling mattered because one exception could have widened the monarchy beyond control, and every future sovereign might have been forced to defend it. Camilla entered expecting a briefing, and stopped when she saw the red seal beside her husband's hand. Her confidence vanished before she reached the chair. Charles did not soften the words. "The decision has already taken effect," he said, and the silence that followed felt heavier than anger. She asked whether her children had been named. He looked down instead of answering. A second sealed attachment contained the full list of relatives affected. The Queen reached toward it, but the King placed his palm over the envelope. That gesture revealed more than any speech could. Even she was being kept outside part of the decision, and no private promise from the monarch could overturn institutional policy. Camilla pulled her hand back, wounded and furious. Charles remained seated, trapped between duty and the woman beside him. Then came the darkest revelation. The order had not begun with newspapers, public outrage, or government pressure. It had begun with a confidential complaint, submitted from inside the royal family itself. As Camilla struggled to understand who had moved against her, the deepest wound was waiting beyond the ruling itself. The decision had placed her husband, her children, and the future king on opposite sides of the same royal divide. For Camilla, the order was not merely about titles. It was a declaration that the family she had protected for decades would never be absorbed into the monarchy she now stood beside. For Charles, it created an impossible fracture between his duty as sovereign and his instinct as a husband. And for William, it became a test of whether the crown could survive another generation of private loyalties shaping public authority. Camilla sat alone in a private drawing room with a family photograph beside her. She had never expected her children to become working royals, members of the family who perform official duties on behalf of the crown, but she believed her marriage had secured them dignity, protected access, and a permanent place at important ceremonies. Now even those quiet assurances were disappearing. The Queen removed her glasses, pressed her fingers against her eyes, and asked an aide to cancel every engagement for the afternoon. Charles felt the walls closing around him. As sovereign, the reigning monarch and constitutional head of the crown, he could not overturn the council without appearing to use royal power for his wife's private benefit. Yet accepting the order left Camilla exposed before her children, and humiliated inside her own household. The king knew the ruling mattered, because one personal exception could weaken every future boundary. But he also knew that constitutional logic would offer little comfort to a wounded mother. William paused outside his father's room and rehearsed his opening words. The Prince of Wales, the title traditionally held by the heir to the throne, supported a hard line between close relatives and people with no official constitutional role. He believed that boundary would protect the next reign from accusations of favoritism. Still, the future king understood that even the slightest satisfaction in his voice could turn a policy dispute into a family war. Charles told his son that Camilla believed the order had branded her family unworthy. William answered that it protected them from being dragged into future battles over money, status, security, and influence. The prince meant it as reassurance. The monarch heard rejection. Neither man raised his voice, but the silence between them carried the bitterness of everything they could not safely say. Tom Parker Bowles received the news through a brief recorded telephone call from a palace secretary. Several invitations were being reconsidered, and future access would depend on personal approval. Tom's first reaction was anger. Moments later, he asked whether his mother was alone. The concern in his voice revealed that his deepest fear was not losing a seat at a ceremony, but watching Camilla face the humiliation without her children beside her. Laura Lopes refused every request for public comment. In a documented private exchange with her brother, Laura asked only whether the Queen had known the ruling was coming before they did. Tom could not answer. That uncertainty hurt more than the order itself, because it raised the possibility that Camilla had been trapped between loyalty to the crown and loyalty to her own family. Anne's name surfaced in an internal briefing note reviewed by William that evening. The document showed that the Princess Royal had examined an earlier version of the restrictions and requested stronger language. Anne had not merely been informed, she had helped shape the boundary, and once Camilla learned that her husband's sister had been involved, the pain hardened into suspicion. Yet none of these emotional wounds explained why the Privy Council had acted now, and the answer led back to one ceremony, one unauthorized promise, and a conversation that crossed a line the palace could no longer ignore. The order had not emerged from years of vague resentment. It began with one specific incident, during a private planning meeting for a future state ceremony. A suggestion was made, a promise was repeated, and a senior courtier realized that Camilla's family was being offered a place no constitutional rule supported. From that moment, concern became documentation, and documentation became the weapon that reached the Privy Council. Palace officials had already grown uneasy about the increasing presence of Camilla's relatives at private royal gatherings. The concern became sharper whenever those events touched succession planning or ceremonial continuity, because such meetings helped define who stood closest to the crown and why. At first, courtiers treated the invitations as personal kindness. Then requests began arriving that described certain relatives as permanent members of the sovereign's inner household, meaning the small group with regular access to the monarch's official and private world. Camilla crossed the line during a closed planning session for a future coronation anniversary service. The ceremony was meant to mark the sovereign's reign through formal worship, family placement, and public symbolism. She instructed the Lord Chamberlain, the senior official responsible for major royal ceremonies, to reserve prominent seats for her grandchildren. A documented account from the meeting recorded her assurance that they would one day be recognized as the Queen's royal family. Anne entered moments later and sensed the tension before anyone explained it. The Princess Royal asked whether the seating request had come directly from Charles. No one answered. That silence mattered, because official placement creates visible hierarchy, and visible hierarchy can become precedent once the public sees it repeated. Camilla insisted the arrangement was symbolic and harmless. Anne answered that symbols inside royal ceremonies never remain harmless for long. The Queen defended her grandchildren as family, but the monarch's sister warned that affection could not quietly become rank. Neither woman raised her voice, yet the divide between them hardened in that room. A handwritten seating draft made the danger impossible to dismiss. It placed Camilla's grandchildren ahead of several blood relatives who remained in the formal line of succession, the legal order determining who may inherit the throne. Constitutional advisors feared the arrangement would suggest authority where none existed. One margin note made the concern even darker: future HRH consideration. William received a copy through a confidential palace file. He read the notation twice, closed the folder, and immediately requested a private meeting with Anne. The prince knew a direct accusation would look like family hostility. She agreed, and together they sent the documents through formal constitutional channels, rather than confronting Camilla in private. The Privy Council review uncovered more. Recorded correspondence discussed security access, ceremonial styles, and possible royal recognition for Camilla's descendants. The evidence transformed one seating request into a pattern, and the pattern became impossible to ignore. Camilla learned of Anne's involvement minutes before she was summoned. The Queen entered the next meeting, knowing the monarch's sister had helped build the case, while William stood beside her, and when the doors closed, years of restrained resentment finally broke into the open. There were no aides in the center of the room, and no public smiles to soften the collision. Camilla faced Anne across the table, while William stood nearby, holding the file that had triggered the ruling. The Queen demanded to know why her own family had been treated like a constitutional threat. Anne answered without raising her voice, and that restraint made the words cut even deeper. Camilla accused both of them of using an old royal instrument to punish her children. The restriction, Anne replied, was not an attack on marriage, affection, or private family bonds. It was designed to stop informal privilege from becoming inherited royal entitlement. That distinction mattered because once special treatment appeared at official ceremonies, future generations could present it as an established right rather than a personal courtesy. The Queen pushed her chair back and asked why her grandchildren should be treated as outsiders after standing beside Charles during illness, mourning, and private family crises. She reminded them that those children had offered loyalty when the palace had demanded silence. Anne did not deny their closeness. She said closeness to the sovereign could not create constitutional rank, meaning an official place within the legal structure of the monarchy. William stepped forward and placed the seating plan on the table. The prince pointed to the handwritten words, "Future HRH consideration." HRH, or His or Her Royal Highness, is a formal style reserved for particular senior members of the royal family. He told Camilla that the notation changed everything, because it suggested permanent recognition, not temporary kindness. Camilla insisted the words were speculative and had never been authorized. Anne answered by opening a second folder containing documented correspondence sent to palace departments. The messages asked officials to explore security access, ceremonial forms of address, and possible recognition for the Queen's descendants. She explained that the requests had already moved beyond imagination. Palace machinery had begun responding. Charles finally broke his silence. The king told his sister that the discussion had become unnecessarily cruel. Anne turned toward him and said the greater cruelty would have been allowing expectations to grow until William, as a future sovereign, was forced to destroy them in public. Her words struck both men because the dispute was no longer only about Camilla's family. It was about the burden waiting for the next reign. The Queen looked directly at William and asked whether Catherine had known about the complaint. He refused to draw his wife into the confrontation. The future king stated that the decision had been his responsibility, and his alone. Camilla's anger shifted into hurt when she realized he had chosen formal procedure over one private warning. Charles moved toward his wife, but she stepped away. Camilla told him that his silence during the council process had felt like agreement with everyone who wanted her family erased. He tried to answer, yet Anne closed the file before he could speak. The Princess Royal declared that the ruling was already active. Only one question remained: would Charles uphold it? The king had spent the meeting trying to preserve peace, but the crown would no longer permit neutrality, and the true balance of power was about to be revealed. The public saw Charles as the source of royal authority, but inside the palace, the truth was more complicated. The crown was powerful precisely because it operated through rules, councils, and carefully guarded limits. The Privy Council had not merely advised the king, it had created a constitutional barrier around the monarchy's future. To tear it down for one family would expose every royal boundary to personal negotiation. Charles sat alone with his principal private secretary after the confrontation ended. The Privy Council, a formal body that advises the sovereign and gives legal force to certain royal decisions, had transformed a private family dispute into an official judgment about who could receive royal styles and privileges. The king asked whether implementation could be delayed. His advisor answered that even a short pause would look like interference for personal benefit. The monarch rose slowly and removed his glasses. He admitted that Camilla might never forgive him for choosing the institution over her children. That fear mattered, because the ruling threatened more than household peace. A sovereign who weakened constitutional rules for his wife could damage public trust, while a husband who enforced them without compassion could damage his marriage beyond repair. The 1917 letters patent now stood at the center of everything. The document, a formal declaration issued by the sovereign to define titles and status, limits princely rank and HRH recognition to specific descendants of the monarch. Its purpose was to stop royal styles from spreading endlessly through marriage, distant family links, or social closeness to the throne. William had already prepared an answer to accusations of revenge. Through a documented message sent to the king's office, the prince offered to issue a public statement accepting the same restrictions for any future non-royal branches connected to his own children. He wanted one standard applied to everyone. The future king knew that without that promise, Camilla's family could appear specially targeted. Anne supported the proposal in a recorded private conversation with Charles. The Princess Royal argued that a universal rule removed the stain of personal hostility. She told her brother that the restriction would only survive if it governed every family joined to the crown through marriage, including those connected to William's future reign. A confidential legal opinion deepened the danger. It warned that exceptional recognition for Camilla's descendants could encourage claims from other extended relatives and weaken control over titles, security, and ceremonial rank. The document made one fact impossible to escape. One exception would never remain one exception. Charles received the final enforcement schedule. Revised guest protocols separated private relatives from official royals. Palace access classifications were changed. Special ceremonial references were removed. The king signed an acknowledgement rather than an approval, making clear that the order did not depend on his personal enthusiasm. The advisor delivered the final blow quietly. Charles could invite Camilla's family into his private home, embrace them as relatives, and protect them from personal cruelty. But he could not present them as an extension of the monarchy. That distinction sounded orderly on paper, but once palace doors, invitations, and security lists began changing, Camilla's family felt the ruling not as constitutional theory, but as immediate rejection. The fallout began before the ink had fully dried. Names disappeared from restricted guest lists. Security classifications were changed. Invitations already prepared were quietly withdrawn. Every adjustment looked small when viewed alone, yet together, they delivered one unmistakable message. Camilla's family could remain close to her heart, but they would no longer stand inside the protected structure of the crown. Palace administrators moved quickly, separating the king and queen's personal guests from officially recognized members of the royal household. That term meant the people formally connected to the monarch's public duties, ceremonies, and state responsibilities. Camilla's children could still enter when privately invited, but automatic access was gone. So were ceremonial precedents, royal transport, publicly funded protection, and any expectation of standing near the sovereign at official events. Tom Parker Bowles received the revised invitation first. His place near the royal party had been replaced by ordinary guest seating at a major palace reception. He read the card once, folded it in half, and placed it on the table. The change looked small, but Tom understood what it signaled. Once the palace altered where he sat, it could also alter how the country understood his place beside his mother. Laura Lopes took a call about her children. They would no longer appear inside the restricted family enclosure at an upcoming national ceremony, a protected section reserved for those formally connected to the royal household. She thanked the official calmly and ended the conversation without protest. Then Laura began to cry. Her pain came not from losing status, but from knowing her children would feel publicly separated from their grandmother. Camilla confronted Charles inside their private apartment. The Queen asked whether he understood how quickly administrative language became humiliation when real families had to live with it. The King replied that he had ordered the changes to be handled discreetly. She answered that secrecy had made everything colder, not kinder. Hidden decisions, she warned, still left visible wounds. Long-serving aides divided behind closed doors. Some believed the restriction protected the monarchy from future confusion. Others feared its harsh implementation would create a permanent fracture around the sovereign. That disagreement mattered, because palace staff would shape every invitation, entrance, and public explanation from that moment forward. William acted before bitterness could spread. In a recorded instruction to his staff, the prince ordered them not to celebrate, brief against Camilla, or describe the ruling as a victory. He warned that triumphal behavior would turn constitutional discipline into personal cruelty. The future king wanted the boundary enforced, but he refused to let humiliation become policy. Anne contacted Tom privately and told him the decision did not weaken his bond with his mother. He answered that institutions might understand the difference between private love and public rank, but families rarely did. The Princess Royal had no easy reply. Camilla made the final move. She withdrew from a planned joint appearance with Charles, creating the first visible sign that the ruling had entered their marriage. Her withdrawal forced the king to confront what no legal document could settle, whether he could save his marriage without weakening the decision he had sworn to uphold. After the anger came silence. No counselors stood between them, no advisors prepared their words, and no ceremonial duty offered an escape. Charles and Camilla sat alone, as husband and wife, rather than sovereign and queen. For the first time since the order was issued, neither argued about titles or precedent. They spoke about fear. The fear of abandonment, humiliation, and losing the family each had fought to protect. Camilla broke the silence first. She admitted that the deepest wound was not the loss of imagined titles, but the belief that her children would always be treated as embarrassing additions to the royal story. The Queen said every changed invitation and closed door made them look unwanted. That mattered because Tom and Laura had never asked to govern, yet the ruling risked turning them into symbols of ambition they had not chosen. Charles moved closer and told her he had never considered them an embarrassment. The king accepted responsibility for allowing informal expectations to grow without clearly stating what the crown could never provide. The crown, meaning the permanent institution of monarchy rather than the private wishes of one ruler, could offer affection and access, but not inherited authority simply because a family stood close to the sovereign. Camilla asked the question she had avoided all evening. Did he support the order? Charles remained silent long enough for the answer to hurt before he finally spoke. He supported the boundary, he said, but regretted the secrecy, the timing, and the way she had been allowed to discover it only after the decision had become irreversible. The monarch explained that overturning the ruling would make every future royal limit appear vulnerable to private pressure. William would then inherit a dangerous burden, forced to defend or reverse exceptions created during his father's reign. That conflict could damage the next monarchy before it had even begun, while making Camilla's children permanent targets for accusations of favoritism. The Queen finally understood the trap. Fighting for an exception might protect her pride for one moment, but it could damage Charles's reign and leave her family carrying public resentment for years. She stopped asking for HRH recognition. Instead, She demanded dignity, no hostile palace briefings, no unnecessary exclusions, and no attempt to use Tom or Laura as examples of royal overreach. Charles agreed. In a recorded instruction prepared for the household that night, the king ordered staff to enforce the boundary without humiliation. Private relatives were to be treated with courtesy, personal invitations were to be respected, and no official was permitted to brief against the Queen's family. Camilla later met William alone. She told the prince she would not challenge the ruling. He admitted that he should have warned her before formal procedure closed every path back. Their exchange brought no warmth, but it created something firmer than affection. A rule neither would break. The crown's boundary would remain, and personal cruelty would not be allowed to hide behind it. The private agreement steadied the family, but the palace could not contain the news. And when the ruling reached the streets, one image transformed a hidden constitutional battle into a national reckoning. By morning, the ruling no longer belonged to palace corridors. It dominated broadcasts, front pages, and conversations across Britain. Some saw a necessary defense of constitutional discipline. Others saw a queen publicly separated from her own bloodline. Yet one moment outside Buckingham Palace captured the national mood more powerfully than any expert debate. Two handwritten signs, held side by side, demanding opposite visions of the monarchy. The London Chronicle landed with a black and gold headline across its front page: "Council draws the royal line." Separate photographs showed Camilla and William looking in opposite directions, turning a private dispute into a national symbol of division. A morning broadcaster outside Buckingham Palace called it the greatest restriction placed on an extended royal family since the modern title system was created. That system defines who may carry royal styles, rank, and public duties. So the ruling reached far beyond one household argument. The crowd gathered quickly near the palace gates. One woman held a sign reading, "The crown is not a family gift." Beside her, another raised the words, "Do not punish a mother's children." The contrast captured why the decision mattered. Supporters feared that personal closeness could slowly become inherited privilege. Critics feared that constitutional order had been enforced without enough compassion for people who had lived near the monarchy for years. Commentators praised the creation of one consistent standard. Marriage to a sovereign, they argued, could not automatically transform unrelated family branches into a new royal dynasty. Other voices attacked the timing and emotional severity, asking why clearer limits had not been stated before expectations were allowed to form. The debate was no longer about whether Camilla's family would receive titles. It was about whether the crown had acted too late and too coldly. Camilla watched the coverage briefly before switching off the television. In a recorded private conversation with her sister, the Queen admitted that the most painful headlines were those suggesting she had tried to build a rival royal line. She could accept the ruling, but not the idea that love for her children had been rewritten as ambition. William answered through a carefully prepared public statement. The prince declared that royal styles belonged to constitutional service and direct succession, not affection or proximity to power. His words defended the principle, while avoiding any attack on Camilla. The future king knew that one cruel phrase could reopen the family wound. Charles released a separate message. The king emphasized that his wife's relatives remained deeply loved in private life, even though they held no official standing within the monarchy. His statement mattered because it drew the final line without denying the family bond. Tom Parker Bowles ended the public dispute with one restrained sentence, delivered in a brief recorded interview. His family had never required titles to know who they were, and they would not seek privileges the crown had formally denied. Camilla would not challenge the order. Her children would not campaign against it. Slowly, the public anger began to cool. With the nation watching and every principal figure finally committed to a position, the monarchy faced its last task, turning a painful family rupture into a lasting constitutional verdict. The final meaning of the order was not that Camilla's family had been erased. It was that love, marriage, and private loyalty could no longer be mistaken for constitutional inheritance. The ruling wounded real people, tested a royal marriage, and forced William and Anne into painful conflict with the king. But when the anger faded, one principle remained unbroken. The crown could belong to a family without becoming the property of every family around it. Camilla's children, grandchildren, and extended relatives remained part of the private family surrounding Charles and his wife. They could be loved, invited, protected personally, and welcomed into private homes. But they would receive no HRH status, princely rank, inherited royal role, automatic palace privilege, or formal constitutional position. HRH, meaning His or Her Royal Highness, was no longer a distant possibility. The door had closed completely. Charles accepted the enforcement of the 1917 letters patent and issued a recorded household directive, applying the same boundary to every non-royal family branch connected to future sovereigns. The document, a formal royal instrument used to define titles and status, would no longer be treated as a weapon against one household. It became a universal rule. That mattered because consistency protected the monarchy from claims of revenge, and it protected future kings from inheriting private exceptions they could not defend. The king and queen arrived together at their next public engagement. Camilla paused before stepping forward, and Charles quietly offered his hand. She accepted it. That single gesture carried the weight of every private argument they had survived. Their marriage had not escaped the damage, but it had endured the divide. William greeted Camilla respectfully and without performance. Their exchange was brief, but the tension had changed. The prince no longer looked like an opponent, and she no longer treated him as the architect of personal humiliation. Trust would take time, yet the confrontation itself was over. Anne met the queen's eyes across the room and gave one restrained nod. The Princess Royal offered neither victory nor apology. Camilla returned the gesture because both women finally understood the same painful truth. Each had acted to protect a family, but only one of those families carried constitutional power. Tom and Laura chose not to attend official royal events unless personally invited. Their decision created a boundary of their own. Family affection would remain, but institutional ambition would not define them. Camilla accepted that protecting her children no longer meant seeking recognition for them. It meant freeing them from expectations that could make them targets forever. Charles learned that duty could not prevent pain, but it could prevent private love from rewriting public limits. William emerged with greater authority, yet also with a warning for his own future. A monarch must defend boundaries, without forgetting the human beings standing beyond them. The ruling did not destroy Camilla's family. It did not remove her from the monarchy, and it did not end her marriage. It clarified where private belonging ended and public authority began. The palace doors remained open to her relatives as loved family, but the path to royal rank was permanently closed, and in that painful distinction, the monarchy preserved both its humanity and its future. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.